Well, hello everyone. It's Pam here from Pam's Crafty Corner. Welcome back to my channel for another episode of Coffee, Crime, and Crafts. These are typically bi-weekly episodes where I discuss the details of a specific crime while I'm working on some sort of weekly craft project. So today we are going to take a look at the case of Mary Beth and Mark Harshbarger. They were a couple from Pennsylvania who came to Newfoundland for a hunting trip that unfortunately ended with a death and criminal charges. So grab your snack and your drink of choice along with your craft project and let's get to it. So today I'm going to be working on my Pat Rogers Tapestry Sampler. This is a piece that is no longer in print. It's a retired piece. Oops, I just lost part of a needle minder. Bear with me. And it has this ornate, beautiful floral border along with the full alphabet. And I've been working over in this section here. This is the last corner flower at the top, and I'm now working my way down the border. So that's what I'm going to work on for a little bit while we have our little discussion this afternoon. Settled in with this piece, and instead of a coffee today, I actually have a large container of water. I just came in from cleaning my car and it's warm, so I decided I'd go with water today. I've already had one coffee and I plan on getting an iced coffee on my way to work this evening. So here we go. I am going to attempt to stitch this without hitting the camera I've got mounted above. And I'm just going to start my first stitch here. Nope, that's the wrong spot. One down one. It's going to be right here. And once I get this started, we're going to start talking about the case. I thought this one was pretty interesting because not only did it have involve people that were not from here, the actual incident did occur here in Newfoundland. So here we go. Let's get started. So Mary Beth Kinter, that was her maiden name. Mary Beth Kinter met Mark Harshbarger in the year 2000. They were both outgoing people with a love of the outdoors. They enjoyed hunting trips and fishing. Mary Beth and Mark's first date was actually a fishing trip. And Mark thought that he had found, you know, everything he wanted in a woman. And so they were married the following year on June 23rd of 2001. They settled in Mashopen, Pennsylvania. I think that's how you pronounce that. So don't come at me in the comments too harshly. And Mary Beth was, you know, readily accepted by Mark's family. They were all very heavily involved in hunting and fishing, as well as gun collecting. Mark had an impressive gun collection at their home, and he and Mary Beth enjoyed many trips on their own, as well as guided hunting vacations. Mary Beth had lots of experience, and she was known to be a very excellent marksman. By 2006, So 5 years after they were married. Mary Beth and Mark had 2 small children, and they were in the middle of building their dream home in Mishopen. I'm not sure if it's Mishopen or Mishopen. Anyway, unfortunately, due to the expense of building this home, the couple were experiencing some financial difficulties. Despite this, Mary Beth had planned a guided hunting trip to Newfoundland as their vacation that year. Now, for those of you who don't know, Newfoundland has very extensive wilderness. And we've got areas that are very well known for dense wildlife. There are many hunting lodges that offer guided hunting trips for both moose and bear hunting, as well as fishing excursions. So Mark's brother, Dean, one of his brothers, Dean and their father had previously traveled to Newfoundland to go hunting. And so Mary Beth contacted the lodge that she was aware of that was located in central Newfoundland in Buckens Junction to make the arrangements for their trip. Mark was pretty hesitant to go ahead with the trip due to the expense, but Mary Beth talked the guide at the hunting lodge and talked him into reducing the cost of their trip based on the fact that they were going to drive to Newfoundland and they were going to stay in their own camper, and they would be providing their own meals. So they would do that rather than have accommodations and meals included in their, I guess, vacation package. So in early September 2006, Mary Beth, Mark, their 2 children, as well as Mark's brother Barry, they all piled into the van, or the truck, sorry, with the camper, and they drove the 2,280 kilometers from Mishopen, Pennsylvania to Buckens Junction. Now I just have to count as well because I'm trying to keep track of where I am in this chart. So they drove the entire distance. When they got here, they had several days of really good hunting. And then on September the 14th, they headed out for what would be their, I guess, their last day of their guided hunting trip. So they headed out from the lodge with their hunting guide as well. And they were bear hunting that day. I think was the intent. Mary Beth specifically wanted to get a bear. So Mary Beth and Mark were pretty competitive. And he had shot an animal, I think, either the day before or a couple days before. So she was pretty anxious to get one as well. Unfortunately, as the day wore on, Mary Beth's chances of shooting a bear were growing pretty slim. In the early evening, Mary Beth was back at the pickup truck that they had parked in a clearing, and she was back at the pickup truck with the kids while Mark, his brother Barry, and the hunting guide were still in the woods. So Mark and the guide were together in one location, and Barry was a little distance away in another location in a hunting blind. So And a hunting blind, for those of you who don't know, is like a structure to kind of hide yourself from an animal, so it disguises you. So all of a sudden, while Mary Beth is sitting there in the truck with the kids, she saw a bear coming out of the woods at the edge of the clearing. She decided that, you know, she was not going to miss her opportunity. So she picked up her rifle, which was equipped with a scope. She located the bear in the, in the sights of the scope, watched it for a couple of minutes, and then fired. At that point, a blood-curdling scream rang out, and Mary Beth had not shot a bear. She had shot her husband, Mark. The guide, the hunting guide, came running just as Barry, Mark's brother, also heard the noise through the wilderness. Mark was dead from a single gunshot wound to the abdomen, and Mary Beth started screaming that she had killed her love and was apparently pretty inconsolable. So the local police, which would be the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with emergency medical services, were contacted, and they attended the scene. The shooting occurred at about 7:55 p.m. Now I have a little knot in the back of my work, which I'm going to fix. Okay, all fixed. Oops, I just hit that's okay. This is why I'm not stitching with my right hand, because I keep hitting where the camera is mounted. So I've been stitching with my left hand. So I'm sorry if that's getting in the way there. So back to our story. So Mary Beth, the shooting had occurred at 7:55 p.m. So 7:55 in the evening, which is actually 24 minutes after sunset and 6 minutes before the legal daylight time for hunting had ended. So she only had 6 minutes of hunting time left that day when she, shot her husband. So obviously the daylight was not at its optimum time to be out trying to, hunt a large animal. So Mary Beth was interviewed at the police station, and she maintained she absolutely believed she was shooting at a black bear. She said she had taken the time she needed to size up the animal in the sight of her scope prior to pulling the trigger. The police also obtained statements from the hunting guide as well as Mark's brother, Barry. Based on the immediate evidence, statements, the time of day that the shooting occurred, and the initial finding of the medical examiner, the police concluded the file as a tragic hunting accident. 3 days later, Mary Beth, Barry, and the children left Newfoundland to travel back home to Mishopen. So this was when the Harshbarger family began to grow suspicious of Mary Beth. And it was also at this point when they returned home that they started finding out information that they had not previously known about her. They just couldn't believe that this had been, a tragic hunting accident. Although, these people were all very familiar with hunting and the dangers, all of that sort of stuff, they just could not believe that this was simply a hunting accident. So, some things that the family started noticing when Mary Beth got home. First of all, when Mark died, Mary Beth didn't call the family to notify them. Instead, the first person that she decided to call was their good friend, Bill Ives. She called Bill and told him what had happened. She said that they had been involved in an accident, and when Bill asked if everyone was okay, if the vehicle was okay, thinking that she meant it was a car accident, Mary Beth said no, the vehicle was fine. It was a hunting accident, and Mark was dead. So Bill was completely shocked, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So once Mary Beth and Barry arrived home, Mary Beth also began acting oddly. She seemed more concerned about, storing and processing the meat that they had from their hunting trip than she was about spending any time with the family or discussing the details of what had happened on the trip. The very next day after she returned home, Mary Beth went straight to Mark's office to clean it out, collect his belongings, all that sort of stuff. Barry, the brother who had been on the hunting trip with them, he began spending more and more time with Mary Beth and at the house. Now, and this would be the house that her and Mark had built together, that the friend, Bill Ives, who she had called when Mark died, he was also the contractor for the house. So Barry said he was, spending more time over there because he was just concerned about Mary, concerned about her and the kids. He wanted to be there to help out with everything that they were going through. He wanted to help around the house. But, then he stunned the rest of his family when he left his wife of 26 years and moved into Mary Beth's home. Barry still denied any sort of romantic relationship, but at one point they were seen together at a county fair with the children, and Barry had his arm around Mary Beth. And another time they were seen at a local bar kissing. So the Harshbarger family, they found out that prior to Mark's death and prior to their trip to Newfoundland, Mary Beth and Mark had actually been in some financial difficulty with the cost of building their new house. The family also learned that the life insurance policy for Mark had been increased to $550,000. And guess who got the payout after Mark's death? Mary Beth. Because his death had been ruled accidental. So more and more information began to surface about Mary Beth's past. Information, of course, that the Harshbarger family had not previously known, and which made them even more suspicious that Mark's death was not accidental after all. Although she did not appear to be distraught after she returned home, Mary Beth's family actually said that she was in counseling and had been seeing 2 separate counselors. Now, this was because Mary Beth had a long history of mental health concerns and issues with violence. So when younger, Mary Beth had actually had an incident where she had driven her car into the house of an ex-boyfriend. And then another time, she fired a weapon at a boyfriend while they were arguing. And then at another incident, she attacked a girl that she caught simply talking to her boyfriend without any evidence that anything had been going on between the boyfriend and this other woman. Her erratic behavior led to her being diagnosed as a manic depressive, and she was prescribed medication to assist with stabilizing her moods. So I've just tied off a thread there on the back, and we are going to continue on. I have one more row to complete on the bottom here. So yeah, so Mary Beth actually was diagnosed, and she was prescribed medication to help stabilize her moods, which seemed to work. And she was on that medication for quite some times. So she had been taking her meds and had been fairly stable. Oops, I'm out of frame there. She had been taking her meds and had been fairly stable when she met and married Mark. It wasn't until she became pregnant with their first child that her mood swings and her erratic behavior returned. And that's because Mary Beth went off her medication while she was pregnant. And that's what had the disastrous effect. Her mood swings became very violent, to the point that Mark convinced her to check into a mental health facility voluntarily. So he wanted her to go get help. And he convinced her to check in to this facility so that she could receive that help that she needed. And she went voluntarily. So she knew that if she got committed to this facility involuntarily, she would lose her right to own weapons and to hunt under Pennsylvania state law. So she agreed, and she checked into the facility. Now, while she was staying at the facility, Mark contacted Bill Ives, and together they went through the couple's collection over 100 guns and made sure that they were all locked up prior to Mary Beth returning home. During a search of the house, Bill found a loaded 12-gauge shotgun under the mattress on Mary Beth's side of the bed. And he also found a weapon that I saw described as a frontline special. I don't know exactly what that is, but I think it's a handgun of some sort. Anyway, that was found underneath a bureau in the bedroom. At some point, Barry made a comment to a family member that Mark knew he would not be returning home from their trip. With this information and the knowledge that the life insurance policy had been increased to $550,000, Mark's father contacted the RCMP in Newfoundland to share his concerns that Mark's death wasn't any accident. Okay, so I finished this row, I started a new thread, and we're going to keep moving along here. So a couple years after the shooting, a couple RCMP officers actually went to Pennsylvania to interview friends and business colleagues of Mark. And then Upon returning to Newfoundland, in April of 2008, the RCMP issued charges against Mary Beth. So, as they didn't have enough direct evidence to support a charge of murder or a charge of manslaughter, what they did was they officially charged Mary Beth with criminal negligence causing death. So she wasn't extradited straight back to Newfoundland right away. After several appeals, finally, a U.S. district judge by the name of Thomas Vanaski, he ordered Mary Beth to surrender herself to the U.S. Marshal Service by May the 14th of 2010 so that she could be extradited to Canada and face those charges in court in Newfoundland. So Mary Beth finally arrived back in Newfoundland on May the 17th, 2010, almost 4 years after Mark's death. The trial would take place in the Newfoundland Supreme Court, located in Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland. As this wasn't a murder trial, there was no jury in the courtroom. Instead, evidence was presented and heard before Justice Richard LeBlanc. So the evidence that was presented at court, well, first they talked about the time of the shooting, the fact that it happened at 7:55 in the evening. On September the 14th of 2006, that would have been 24 minutes after sunset and 6 minutes before the end of legal light for hunting. The court heard that Mark's location at the time of the shooting was at the edge of the clearing, approximately 61 meters or 200 feet away from Mary Beth's location at the truck. Now, several witnesses suggested that it was simply too dark to shoot with confidence from that distance. Testimony was also brought forward that Mark had not been wearing any of the traditional blaze orange gear that hunters typically wear while they're in dense woods. So hunters will usually wear an orange cap or a vest so that they're easily visible to other hunters in the area, especially if you have more than one hunting party out at the same time, or you have people from the same party that have split up. Reenactments were done with several different people. The hunting guide, Lambert Green, as well as the owner of the Moosehead Lodge, Reg White, they both said that what they saw through the rifle scope looked more animal than human. Police officers testified that what they saw was pretty much a black mass. And they agreed that it was plausible that Mary Beth thought she was actually aiming at a bear. The autopsy was done by provincial pathologist Dr. Nash Dennick. The autopsy results concluded that Mark had died from a single gunshot wound to the abdomen. From the location and the angle of the wound, Dr. Dennick revealed during the trial that Mark was most likely leaning over at the time he was shot. And Dr. Dennick's testimony was pretty significant because it made the issue of Mark's posture at the time of the shooting relevant. Because a lot of people were saying, how could you mistake an upright man walking for a bear? Bears don't usually walk for periods of time or walk in the woods on their hind legs upright like a person. They walk on all fours. They only stand up on their hind legs, for short periods of time. So that's why the evidence that, according to the angle of the wound, it would appear that Mark had been leaning over when he was shot. That might explain how Mary Beth could have mistook him for a bear, because he wasn't standing upright at the time. Mary Beth didn't take the stand at the trial. Instead, her taped interviews from the police investigation were played in court and entered into evidence. Once all the evidence had been presented, Justice LeBlanc returned with a verdict of not guilty. He concluded that the Crown had failed to prove Mary Beth had displayed a complete disregard for safety. He determined that Mark's death was indeed the result of an accident and nothing more. So in order for her to have been found guilty of criminal negligence causing death, they would have had to prove that she had complete disregard for any sort of safety when she fired her weapon. So the court's decision was based on evidence that was presented that Mark had entered the woods with a guide, but he returned walking toward the clearing on his own. So he was by himself. So Mary Beth was expecting that she would have seen Mark and the guide walk out together, but that wasn't the case. She just saw a lone figure that she presumed to be a bear coming out of the clearing. Mark was dressed in jeans and a dark blue clothing without any blaze orange hunting gear on. That Mark was walking back through deeply rutted, overgrown logging trail that, was overgrown with tall grass. The rough terrain would have made him walk in a zigzag sort of pattern, leaning in order to maintain his balance. So movements that, given the low level of daylight and the distance from the truck, could have been construed as those of a bear. Posture at the time of the shooting that was supported, by the evidence from the autopsy, right? So Dr. Denick also said that he felt Mark was leaning over or bent over at the time he was shot. So Mary Beth, to the horror of Mark's family, was not guilty, and she was released. On October 29th, 2010, the Crown released its decision not to appeal the verdict of not guilty. In Canada, the Crown can only appeal if the trial judge makes an error of law. They can't appeal on the basis of a dispute over the facts of the case. I'm just going to tie off this thread here. Okay, here we go. I've started another little section here. So, obviously the family wasn't happy about the outcome, but it is what it is. She was released. She went home to Pennsylvania. While she was on trial, Barry Harshbarger actually left her for another woman. He applied for and was granted a temporary protection from abuse order that was later overturned in court. And Barry owned a really large collection of about 130 guns that Mary Beth had in her possession at the house. And he petitioned the court to have those returned to him. So years later, Barry now admits that, you know, Mary Beth's manic mood swings, you know, they could have caused Mary Beth's spur of the moment action that day. But if so, he says, you know, the outcome would still have been the same. He doesn't believe that Mark's death really could have been prevented, and does think it was an accident, either her mood swing involved or not, but he still thinks it was an accident. And that is it. That's the end of the story of Mary Beth and Mark Harshbarger. Completely odd. I don't know how she returned home and ended up in a relationship with his brother. I mean, the brother was then ostracized from the family. So then not only did the family lose Mark because of his death, they also lost Barry because of everything that happened after, you know, Mark's death. Really odd case. So I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as anyone can enjoy information about true crime. If you did, please give the episode a like, subscribe to my channel. I tend to put up videos of this sort of content every couple of weeks, along with crafting videos in between. And if you want to help support my channel and the time it takes to research and prepare each episode, feel free to check out the Buy Me a Coffee link that I usually have in the description box below, because a coffee is always appreciated, especially by those of us who are shift workers. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy your crafting.